the moment before breakthrough arrives, your entire world starts vibrating at a different frequency. Everything familiar suddenly feels foreign, like you're wearing clothes that belong to someone else. Most people interpret this shift as a warning sign. What they fail to understand is that consciousness is preparing to shed the limitations that have been constraining its expansion. Within moments, you'll discover why this inner turbulence isn't destruction. It's the unmistakable signature that evolution has been activated. And it indicates you're standing at the threshold of unprecedented growth. Have you ever observed how your psyche gravitates toward familiar patterns, even those that cause suffering? You'll declare your intention to think differently. Express your desire to break free from repetitive loops. Yet somehow, almost unconsciously, you drift back into the same mental territory. This occurs because your current identity isn't simply one behavioural pattern you can modify. It's an interconnected network constructed like a spider's web. Each thread reinforces the others, maintaining structural integrity so the entire system remains stable. Thoughts, assumptions, limitations, emotional reactions, they all strengthen each other, preserving the architecture of who you've been, even when it constrains who you're evolving to become. Consider it similar to the firmware in an aging smartphone. The device might still operate, but the programming is obsolete. It creates lag, freezes during crucial moments, and fights against every attempt at optimization. This precisely mirrors how your existing identity functions. It executes background processes created long ago, processes that once served a function, but now actively prevent your advancement. Unlike applications on a phone, you can't simply uninstall them. The entire system requires recognition before transformation becomes possible. Here's the mechanism in practical terms. One limiting belief surfaces, perhaps something subtle like, "I'm not qualified for this opportunity." Your nervous system responds with that recognizable stress sensation. This physical contraction causes you to withdraw or postpone action entirely. The withdrawal then validates the original belief that initiated the sequence. You see, I truly wasn't prepared. This singular circuit becomes a pattern, repeating continuously. And because your consciousness prioritizes familiarity, it permits this circuit to crystallize into automatic functioning, regardless of its destructive nature. Neuroscientists frequently describe how the brain conserves resources by repeating established neural networks. Picture carving the identical route across a field every single day. The earth becomes compressed. Movement becomes effortless, so you continue following it, simply because it demands less energy than forging a fresh pathway. Even when that route leads you in endless circles, it feels more secure than navigating unknown terrain toward an uncertain destination. Your mental processes operate identically. The existing identity persuades you to maintain the current trajectory. Not because it benefits your growth, but because it protects your system from the energy expenditure of constructing something unprecedented. The challenge is these comfortable circuits don't function independently. That subtle voice of inadequacy isn't merely inadequacy. It sustains a broader network of limitation. That limitation spreads into hesitation, which extends into your decisions, which influence entire dimensions of your experience. One unstable connection supports the complete motherboard of your current identity. Remove inadequacy and hesitation loses influence. Remove hesitation and limitation begins to dissolve. However, as long as these connections stay active, the web endures and the outdated programming continues operating. And here's where the process becomes fascinating. When the network finally starts fracturing, the experience isn't smooth. It doesn't feel organized. Your consciousness detects disruption and discomfort intensifies. Established patterns will actually amplify more dramatically, as though they are fighting for their survival. You might discover that limitations feel more pronounced, or anxieties appear stronger. This isn't regression. It's the indication you've contacted the perimeter of your current design. Your system is fighting back because it recognizes it's approaching dissolution. This explains why gravitating toward familiar routines isn't evidence of weakness. It's confirmation you've challenged the boundaries of what no longer serves your expansion. The very resistance that feels overwhelming is verification that fractures have begun forming in the framework you've maintained for years. And this becomes your moment of empowerment, not by rejecting them or pretending they vanished, but by finally perceiving them accurately. Networks you once required, but no longer require now. The fundamental reality is that recognition becomes your primary instrument for reprogramming. Identifying a circuit, detecting the obsolete firmware, and comprehending how one thought reinforces another. This creates the opening. Once you perceive the network, you're no longer trapped within its operation. You can start redirecting it toward a different configuration. And when you modify even the smallest circuit, the others begin losing their dominance. So the question isn't whether your current identity will transform. It's how you'll navigate the moment when it does. Because when the network truly begins dissolving, it resembles nothing like structure. It resembles chaos, expanding at the periphery of your awareness. And that's precisely our next destination. What does dissolution feel like when an aspect of you starts deconstructing? It's not peaceful or comforting. It doesn't arrive with soothing melodies or a detailed blueprint. It typically feels intense and disorienting, like the atmosphere is becoming denser. And every inhalation demands greater concentration. You sense a compression building, as though your own consciousness and form have suddenly become too restrictive for your expanding essence. It resembles being confined within boundaries that no longer accommodate your magnitude, constricting you from all directions. Nothing aligns the way it previously did. And this compression only amplifies when you attempt to dismiss it. This compression signals that something fundamental is restructuring. But initially, it seldom resembles advancement. It often appears more like disintegration. Many individuals mistake this phase for reaching their lowest point. They interpret it as breakdown, vulnerability, or evidence that they've been pursuing the wrong direction. But what they're actually experiencing is the collapse of a network that can no longer maintain its previous operation. It resembles observing a structure vibrate and fracture under pressure. The vibration feels alarming, but it's an organic aspect of what occurs before something innovative can be constructed. One of the most vivid illustrations of this process comes from the metamorphosis within a cocoon. From external observation, you'd assume it was serenely resting, preparing to develop wings. But internally, the caterpillar actually liquefies. It transforms into a form of living essence before reorganizing itself into a butterfly. This stage is chaotic, delicate, and unrecognizable from the creature it previously was. Nobody celebrates the liquid transformation stage because it doesn't resemble progress. Yet, it's the precise mechanism that enables evolution. Something comparable occurs within you when your current identity begins dissolving. Studies on identity transformation demonstrate that individuals experiencing major internal shifts frequently encounter feelings of confusion, even mourning. You suddenly question concepts you never questioned previously. Convictions that once felt like bedrock reveal themselves to be shifting sand. Patterns you used to justify start disturbing you so intensely that you can no longer tolerate them. And as this develops, it feels like you've lost your foundation, because part of you genuinely has. The part you maintained for so long, even when it no longer supported your growth. Consider someone who has always operated from the conviction, I lack sufficient capability. They may have structured their entire existence around it. They avoid challenges. They choose predictable routines. They maintain their aspirations modest, so they won't face confrontation. But the instant that conviction fractures, they feel disoriented temporarily. What should they do without that familiar identity? Who are they if they stop rehearsing the same limiting narrative. That's the unusual compression that emerges where the familiar script is fragmenting, but the new one hasn't yet been written. This is termed the liquefaction phase. It's the instant where what you've known exhausts itself. And if you've ever attempted to release a pattern or identity, you already understand how intense the opposition can become. The limitations protest louder, the anxieties strike harder, not because you're declining, but because the network is struggling for continuation. Just like flames burn brightest before extinguishing, the current identity often creates its greatest disturbance before it breaks. The most challenging aspect of this phase is that it doesn't feel like a commencement. It feels like a conclusion, like you're releasing too much simultaneously. But in reality, the discomfort isn't the finale, it's a gateway. Consider the profound soreness in your muscles right before they rebuild stronger, or the ice that fractures before water can move freely once more. The identical process occurs to your consciousness and identity. Frameworks must soften, crumble, and release before space emerges for anything else. Breakthrough always initiates at the point of maximum pressure, when the network can't maintain cohesion anymore, when the fractures are too extensive, when you feel like the foundation cannot endure. That's when regeneration breaks through. This sensation of falling apart is actually the precise signal that something innovative now has opportunity to develop. What emerges next after the dissolution isn't disorder or void. It's the space where harmony begins to crystallize. So, what ascends from the transformation when the old network burns away? Initially, it doesn't appear magnificent or commanding. Regeneration arrives softly, almost tentatively, like the first tender leaves emerging through winter soil. It's gentle, uncertain, and so simple to miss. But just because it feels delicate doesn't mean it lacks substance. In fact, this early phase is when the foundation of your new identity is developing, more resilient and more flexible than anything you've previously carried. When your established patterns collapse, there's an immediate opening where the automatic responses used to exist. And in that void, the brain begins connecting fresh neural networks. It doesn't occur instantly, and it doesn't feel refined. You might notice yourself intercepting an old thought, pausing and selecting differently. It's not a spectacular transformation. It's gentle, like noticing a space feels brighter after raising the blinds. The change develops gradually, but each small decision builds upon the previous until an entirely new network takes form. The difficulty is this phase doesn't feel secure immediately. Consider a tree after it releases its old bark. For a brief period, it's vulnerable. The fresh surface underneath is sensitive and raw, not quite prepared for the environment. That's what rebirth feels like within you. The familiarity of the old convictions is gone, but the stability of the new network isn't completely established yet. You're expanding, but you also feel exposed. And this exposure misleads many people into believing they've moved backward. They anticipate regeneration to feel powerful immediately. But strength only develops after exposure, after you remain in that discomfort long enough for resilience to form. Brain research helps clarify why this phase feels so unstable. When your brain begins creating new neural pathways, the old ones gradually weaken. Imagine a route you've travelled for decades, been permanently closed. You now must navigate a different path. And initially, it feels disorienting and clumsy. You might doubt yourself, make incorrect turns, or become impatient. But through practice, that new path becomes clear and natural. Eventually, it even becomes more efficient than the road you always used previously. That's what's occurring within your consciousness. The old network of inadequacy, anxiety, or hesitation loses power because you stop activating it. And the new pathway of clarity and self-confidence gains strength because you keep choosing it. You can actually sense this happening when self-doubt begins to evaporate. There's an instant when the voice that always whispered, "You'll struggle," starts to sound less persuasive. Instead of contracting in response, you begin to consider, perhaps I can navigate this. That single transformation is more than one new thought. It's the foundation of an entirely different network. Because when you trust yourself in one situation, the confidence spreads into other domains. You carry yourself differently. You communicate with a more stable presence. You pursue actions you used to postpone. Dissolving one defective component like anxiety causes the whole system to reorganize itself around confidence, clarity, and tranquility. And this transformation cascades. When anxiety begins to dissipate, it creates space for momentum. Without the dense weight of hesitation, you advance faster. Without the haze of uncertainty, you process clearer. It's not just one minor enhancement. It's a domino effect where new networks activate together, elevating you higher than you've ever reached before. What began as fragile seedlings breaking through the earth eventually become roots strong enough to support a new season of your existence. That's why transformation transcends mere survival. Survival only means persisting. Evolution means becoming something your previous identity never had the capacity to envision. The caterpillar didn't survive by clinging more desperately to what it was. It evolved into something completely new. The same is now occurring within you. The dissolution of the old wasn't destruction. It was preparation. It was creating sufficient space so that something more authentic could expand. The so-called death of the old identity is nothing to mourn. It's the birth of a version of you that isn't divided by anxiety or weighed down by persistent uncertainty. It's the emergence of an integrated identity that can finally occupy the space that once felt so unbearably restrictive. This new network doesn't operate on automatic fear. It operates on alignment, confidence, and progressive movement. And if you're experiencing that fragility within yourself right now, if the discomfort seems intense and unfamiliar, remember, it isn't a regression. It's the signal that your regeneration is already in motion. Now, I want to pause for just a moment to acknowledge something important. If these insights are resonating with you and sparking that inner recognition, the most powerful way to honour this process is to stay connected to this journey. It's not about numbers or algorithms. It's about building a community where transformation can unfold naturally and be witnessed with compassion. This is where possibility meets purpose. Because once you permit that new network to expand, everything else begins to transform with it. And the only direction from here is upward. The old identity isn't actually dissolving. It's preparing the foundation, so something wiser, stronger, and more authentic can establish itself. What feels like an ending is really just the opening chapter of something unprecedented. Don't fight the pressure you're experiencing right now. That compression is proof that your transformation has already commenced. It's not your collapse, it's your signal. And before we conclude, here's a practice to anchor this moment. If you felt that inner shift while listening, if something has clicked into place, write this affirmation. I am ready for my next evolution. Let this be more than words. Let it be your declaration that you're prepared to step fully into what's waiting to emerge. You're not losing yourself. You're finally awakening to the version of you that was ready all along.